Alright, it's finally time for the Bravos review. Today we're going to be looking at Kojo and Buddha, Basira and Kaizemon, and Itsadi and Surge, and the cards that support them. It's been a little bit since I made my last review, but I finally have time to get back to these again. And watch out, I'll be trying to get the Ortis one up next week as well, to try and just finish off that series. It's been a lot of fun with the launch of the game around last week. Super exciting to be able to finally play events at my local game store, and Board Game Arena's up now too, so yeah, I'll put a link up for that in the description. Definitely check it out and start playing with your collection online. The first hero is Kojo and Buddha. You're going to want to play a lot of low-cost characters and things with better stats than average for their cost. And what you're trying to do usually, since you can get that Buddha 2/2/2 token on the turns you go first, you want to just like find one turn early to be able to get an expedition lead, and then you just trade with your opponent for the rest of the game and hold on to that. To supplement the strategy, you can run a lot of removal, sabotage, and disruption spells. I think that these are pretty good in Kojo because you're not really focused around combos, and so you can kind of afford to add whatever tech you want into the list. The next hero is Basira and Kaizemon. To combo with your hero effect, where when you boost something, you can give something an additional boost, you'll want to run a lot of cards that boost themselves, of course, or other characters. And so here we've got Bravos Blade Dancer with Seasoned, especially to take advantage of this strong mechanic for Basir, where you can keep the boost on the cards that go to reserve. You'll like recursion effects, things that can remove fleeting so that you can use those seasoned characters over and over. For Itsadi and Surge, you have a totally different game plan. You're going to be drawing cards when you play expensive characters, and so to get to that point, you're going to want to play things that ramp your mana, like mana channeling, that put you those extra mana orbs. And then to finish out the game, you're going to want these strong, powerful characters that can help you win both expeditions or make up for the lost tempo you had in the early game. So, without further ado, let's jump into each of the cards from Beyond the Gates and be ranking them on 1 to 3 for how well I think they fit in these heroes. For a 1, it means I think the card will see little or no play. A 2 means it can see play, and it'll just kind of depend on how you build the deck, if you want to run it or not. And then 3s are cards that I think are must-runs for these heroes. The first is Isenboshi. I feel like that the 002 stat line is very good for a 1-drop, and so in aggressive Kojo, I could see this scene play. In Basira, it's great because you can set up that boost to be able to combo with your hero power. And I even think this has a place in Itsadi because you can use it to boost a lot of the gigantic characters that you play, or even just as like a cheap 1-drop in the early game that you can play with your mana channeling so that you can hopefully trade an expedition while ramping. With the rare though, I don't really like this upgrade. I feel like the common was good enough and there's not really a place for this right now. Next is Bravos Blade Dancer. I think that from hand, this card is a great rate, getting the 1/1/1 in stats for 1, but unless you can combo something with it, it's a little too expensive from the reserve. I feel like in Itsadi, you're already trying to run your ramp and big payoff, and you can't really run this and boosting cards as well. But for Basira, it's totally fine. Your main game plan is going to be boosting stuff like this up so that you can play them from the reserve with a ton of boosts and they're seasoned. So I think it'll fit naturally there, and the 1 cost from hand to be able to boost something is just like such an efficient way to trigger the hero ability even on day 1. And in Kojo, I think this is good enough from hand, and you might be running enough boost cards like Chiron or Physical Training that you could justify this as well. For the rare, it loses fleeting if it has 4 or less boosts when you play it from reserve. You can play this over and over, and it can get really big, like 888 and things from the reserve. I feel like, though, you have a lot of cards like Helping Hand and things that remove fleeting already, and it is a little weak to removal, and the common's just so good that you can definitely play this in Kojo or Basira, but I feel like it's not necessarily a requirement, and for Itsadi, I feel like, yeah, this doesn't fit super well. Looking at Ratatoskr, this card is just the most basic card, I feel like. It has perfectly fair stats from hand and reserve, and so people who are trying to fill that last spot in their deck definitely might run it. It's a fine card, but I feel like it's just a little bit below average for what you're looking for, and the 3 cost is pretty highly contested in Bravos, so if I'm trying to use a 3 cost card during my turn, I don't think I'm going to want it to normally be the Ratatoskr. With the upgrade, you get an additional boost from the reserve. I feel like that's a little unnecessary in Basira, and in Itsadi, you're probably using your rares somewhere else. but I could definitely see people using this in Kojo because that extra boost might let you be able to 2-0 your opponent one day in the game. And I also think that this is really good with the Foundry, Axiom, Bastion. I don't think that card's super competitive right now, but it is a lot of fun. It's a 3-cost permanent that you can use basically once per day to activate the from reserve triggers of the next character you play from your hand. So then you can basically have this be a 4/4/4 when you play it from your hand with that card. So maybe in Kojo or maybe in a deck with the Foundry this could see play, but I don't think it'll be seeing a ton of play. Bravo's Pathfinder has pretty great stats for a 2-drop. I feel like for a 1-drop, you either want it to be a 1/1/1 or a 0/0/2, and for a 2-drop, you either want it to be a 2/2/2 or a 0/3/3. And so we have one of the best stat lines here, but there is no effect. I feel like in Basira, you're going to need something like Chiron or something instead of this that has more synergy, but for Kojo and Buddha, this can just be a pretty well statted character and worth running. And for its Sadi, I feel like you do need some low cost cards to fill out your early curve, and this is a pretty good one. Looking at the rare, now it gains Seasoned and the ability to boost itself. That's really good in Basira. I feel like though the rare slots are just contested enough where you might not always be running this. It's like a good option, but there are other good options as well. And honestly, you can get some advantage out of this in Kojo and Buddha, so I could see it being run there too. But I feel like you don't want to spend this much mana on something that isn't ramping you or helping your game plan in its Sadi, and the Seasoned isn't as relevant there. Bravo's Tracer is a pretty interesting card. It really plays into the Bravos flavor of having like above average stats but running out of resources quickly. I think that this could be pretty good in Kojo or at Sadi to help you get a little bit of advantage or keep up in the early game, especially in Sadi too. Since you're drawing so many cards, you can afford to waste some resources like this or like give things fleeting. But for Basira, I feel like you'd rather just play something like Chiron that can boost itself and then get a boost with your hero power to essentially get the same stats. And I don't think, this will see a ton of play there. The rare gets 4 in Forest and Water. That's honestly pretty incredible for a 2-drop. It is sad though. I feel like normally you want to have a rare that you can get the extra benefit out of twice instead of just once. This is pretty strong though, and honestly some form of Tracer could be seen in all 3 of the heroes, but I am feeling like it's definitely more of a player decision and not something that needs to be required. I feel like too that you're more likely to want to use your rare slot on something else in Basira, but maybe you'd still throw this in the other 2. Chiron is very strong to me. It's basically just a 2/2/2 from hand if you boost itself, but you also have the option to boost something in the other expedition. And so with already on par stats, I feel like that flexibility to use its effect to trigger maybe a hero power in Basira or just like push both expeditions can be really strong. I think this is fine everywhere and a powerhouse in Basira. For the rare, you get to give 2 characters a boost. I feel like there are some situations where this is better than a common, but oftentimes if you're just boosting something else and Chiron itself, then you only really get 1 extra forest stat over what you would have had from the common, so I think it's most of the time not quite necessary. Red has the perfect stat line again for a 2-drop and Seasoned, already making it a little bit better than Monolith Runescribe. I feel like the stats are good enough that you might play it in Kojo and then just hope you get lucky every once in a while where you can combo with some boosts. And in Basira, I think this can definitely be good as well. I feel like you need some backup Seasoned characters if you don't draw like your main power plays, like if you don't have your Atlas or one of your other powerful Seasoned cards, just having this as a backup that you can use with your things like Helping Hand can be really good. In its Sadi, I feel like you probably run something like Chiron over this, and I don't know if you'll need that many 2-drops because Chiron can combo with your Tiny Gens and things, whereas this I don't know if it would have as much value. The rare, it's really cool that it can draw a card, and that's something that Bravos I feel like is lacking right now is good card draw, but the requirement to have 3 boosts is a little high, and the 3 cost from the reserve is painful. If this cost 2 from the reserve, I feel like it'd be insane, but yeah, with that 3 cost is really competing with a lot of the other powerful 3 cost cards right now, and so yeah, I think it could maybe see play in Basira, but I don't think it'd be good enough anywhere else. Tiny Jin is a pretty good ramp. I feel like the rare just outclasses the common a ton, but you could definitely see people playing this in Basira where they can boost it from hand with a different effect instead of having to play it twice, and in Saudi the ramp is important, so I feel like it could see some play there. But I feel like Kojo's definitely going to want to run this version. The stats here are so good now. It's got that great 0-2-0 stats for hand, and then from reserve, for 2 costs, getting a 1-3-1 is actually like a pretty good stat line. It's not my favorite stat line for a 2-drop, but it's definitely not bad. And then you get a free mana on top of it, so I feel like, yeah, this card is just great value. I can definitely see it seeing play anywhere, and especially in Basira where it works so easily. I feel like it's a powerhouse. The only reason you might end up cutting this out of some of your lists is just because you have a hard time drawing enough cards to actually use all of the mana, so until maybe we get some more draw, some people might not run it, but yeah, I really see like a good future for this card. Haven Trainee is a little bit of a vanilla card. It's got just an okay stat line from hand. Kojo players might be able to take advantage of this to get a double advance early on and kind of get that lead they're looking for, but I don't think anyone else will really be wanting to run this. Unless you're playing the Foundry Axiom Bastion, then this can be pretty good too, but I don't know if that'll be super competitive. The rare version getting the ability to boost something as the support ability is pretty good for Basira. I think though you probably are going to play things like Isenboshi and Haven Warrior first, but it could be an option. Bravos Vanguard, it is pretty good for its cost, but it's not excellent or anything. It's just alright. You have to get kind of lucky for the forest stat to line up with what you're doing, and removing fleeting is pretty equivalent about to like resupplying into something, but it does work a little bit better with things that have like seasoned. I feel like this card is fine. It's not making any crazy plays, but it's good enough that it'll probably see some play in any of the heroes. For the rare, now you get to give something a boost. Now the rate on this card is actually pretty crazy. You're getting essentially a 5-3-3 and card advantage for 3. I think while that is very strong, I have found this to be a little bit awkward when I've been testing. I feel like sometimes you just have a lot of 3-drops and it's hard to play this and the thing you want to remove fleeting from until around like 6 or more mana. And so because of that, it has been a little bit underwhelming for me at times, but when things line up, this is still really strong. So I think players will have to decide if that's worth it to them or not. I feel like though in Saudi, this is not quite as necessary, and it'd be really hard to play this and some of your bigger cards in the same turn, so I don't think you'll see play there. Haven Bouncers, the standard sabotage for Bravos, I feel like it does an average job of what it does, and it's pretty similar to what you see in other factions. If you need sabotage, you'll probably be throwing this in, and it's great that it's a common, but it's not so strong that you'll be running it no matter what. It'll probably just be only if you feel like sabotage is necessary for the meta. The rare version getting the extra boost once is fine. I feel like some of your rares are going to get an additional boost from hand and reserve, or cost like 1 less mana twice or something like that. And so seeing this Haven Bouncer change, it's only getting the benefit one time you play it, which is just alright. If you're playing the Foundry, you might want to run this, and in a Kojo, maybe you can take advantage of the stats, but I don't see this having a ton of play. Haven Warrior has pretty good stats for 3-drop. You lose the effect to remove fleeting from the Vanguard, but then you get an additional 2 in water. This is honestly pretty good, and I could see people using it as filler in Kojo or Saudi. I feel like in Basira though, you'll have something that boosts or something that can take this spot instead, but it's alright. The rare version having 4s across the board is very strong. I feel like now we have a lot more options to do synergistic plays, and maybe just vanilla 4-4-4 isn't quite as good, but honestly, personally, I'm still running this in most of my lists. I feel like having something like this can get you that expedition lead. If you go second on the first day, it's pretty easy to play on the same side as your opponent and then move and block them. So I feel like there's still a lot of potential for this card, and especially in Basira, if you have really good seasoned characters or uniques that want to get boosted, I think you might be slotting this in. Also, since it costs a little more than some of your 1 and 2 drops, it kind of conserves your resources too, so I don't think this is bad at all. Hua Mulan also would conserve your resources, but that 1-3-3 stat line is something that I don't even really want once, much less multiple times through the game. Yeah, I think it's just not quite good enough. The rare version is surprisingly better. You almost get perfect stats for a 2-drop, and then you can have it essentially eternally. I like this a little bit more than Sun Wukong because I feel like the costing's a little bit better, and I think this could see play anywhere. I feel like maybe it's the card that'll come back in future sets because right now there's a lot of competition for rare drops, and this one's pretty good with things like Bravos Bastion, but maybe just not quite exciting enough for a lot of players to run it. Tamogozan has really good stats, but they're locked behind 7 mana orbs before you can play it. I feel like that in Tsadi, that's going to be the easiest to achieve, so you're not really held back by that at all. For Basira, you can probably just run some boosting characters to get a similar amount of power and have less requirements, and in Kojo, I think this could be pretty good too. You'll often run things like Tiny Jin or Mighty Jin as well, or other ramp cards, so you can probably meet the condition pretty quick and really just take advantage of those stats to make sure you don't get behind in the late game once other people are setting up strong permanents and things to contest you. I think that the upgrade for the rare is pretty unnecessary. It will make you be able to play this 1 turn earlier, but as soon as you have 7 mana orbs, the change essentially does nothing, so I feel like it's probably not worth it in most heroes. Sun Wukong's alright. From hand, the stats are pretty bad, and then from reserve, it is honestly not even that impressive either. So yeah, for the common, I don't know if this will see any play. I did give it 2s for some of the heroes. I think it's fine right now, but it's definitely closer to your like 39th card in the deck. The rare version brings in a new option where essentially you're having infinite resources with this card. They can't sabotage it. I feel like Kojo decks that are aggressive and burn out of resources fast would benefit from that the most, and the other heroes probably don't care about this too much. People will probably enjoy this card and experiment with it as like a 1 or 2 of in a lot of the heroes, but I don't know if it's like going to be your best card at the end of the day. Mighty Jin, on the other hand, is very impressive to me. The 4/4 stat line with the 0 and water is a little bit tricky. You do have to be purposeful with the turns you play it. A lot of times you'll be kind of praying on the first day that you and your opponent move into the right expedition so that water isn't relevant. And so a lot of times it'll just be like a 50-50 on if this is like an absolute powerhouse or just alright going into day 2. But I think that if you're comfortable with your deck and get used to playing this card, you'll be able to find the right times to play it, and then getting that extra mana is very strong, and oftentimes you're going to want to play this twice and not mana it the first time just to get some more value out of the card and not run out of resources. Similarly, with this second version, now you can draw a card instead of putting it in the mana, and so you can either draw 2 cards or draw 1 card the first time and then mana it the second time. I feel like the ramp is very strong in all of the heroes, and I also feel like the card draw is pretty necessary in a lot of them as well. I think that you really don't want to run out of gas, especially if you're using extra mana each turn. You're going to need more cards, and so this card kind of just lines up perfectly. You could see people choosing the common instead, or maybe cutting this, but I feel like I'm going to give it a 3 just because I'm running it in basically all of the heroes right now, and yeah, it is kind of a powerhouse. Kappa, on the other hand, is a little underwhelming. Surprisingly, trading an extra mana orb for 5 stats in water isn't really doing it for me. And even with the rare, now you have Seasoned and the ability to give a boost from the reserve, but I feel like you can basically get the same card from Haven Warrior if you're ignoring Season, the 4/4 for 3, and I don't know, at this point you're almost ready to just play an Atlas to boost with Seasoned. It just doesn't quite get there for me. Achilles is interesting. 555 for 5 I feel like is actually a little bit below average, but you do have tough 1. A lot of times the biggest problem with playing expensive characters is that they don't trade well into your opponent's removal spells. And so this one honestly probably has a place in at Saudi specifically. You do want a couple high drops to start drawing. And so this is probably your best just generic 5-drop that you can run that isn't really reliant on what your opponent's doing. And this might even see some play in Kojo as a finisher once you have a lot of mana to just use a little bit more of that in a day, and just that toughness could be alright, but it's not really synergistic with Basira, so I don't see it having play there. The rare version gets a little bit better stats and a little more toughness. I think that is pretty good for Kojo and Saudi. It's just a little bit better at what you were wanting it to do in the common version, but it is taking up a rare slot, so it'll be the trade-off you have to make. Atlas is a memorable card from the starter deck. I'm sure that people have played this in physical training often and enjoy it. I feel like with the full set though, it's just a little bit too weak, especially in the common form. Maybe you could play this in Saudi because it could give you a draw as well. But I think most of the time, if you're going to be running this, it'll be the rare version. Basira, this is very strong, and some players will run 3 of this in Basira and build around it. The only reason I'm giving it a 2 though is I feel like you have multiple ways to take the deck, and that's one of them, but it's not like the only way to play the deck. From the reserve, giving something 2 boosts is pretty cool, but most of the time you're wanting to play this again because it'll probably have some boosts left over, and yeah, this can get really big. The only sad thing is it's easily dealt with removal, so if removal's common in the meta, you'll probably see less of this, but it is a cool card. Shenlong has pretty good stats, some of the biggest stats in the game, but it is pretty expensive. I feel like you might run this in Saudi for the draw, and in Kojo you might run this for those really late game turns when you need a good top deck, but it's not too impressive to me. The rare version gets tough 1 and slightly better stats. If they have a removal, they're still going to be trading favorably into you, but I can still see this being played in Kojo or Saudi for some of the same reasons we've described. Kybera is getting even more expensive, but now essentially you're getting 12 worth of stats in all of the region types. You kind of have to run this in Saudi right now because you need payoffs for ramping, but I honestly think we might get better payoff in the future. If you can boost this up a little bit with like an Isenboshi, it does get better. Maybe you'd see people playing this in Kojo, but I feel like it's going to be too much of a brick in the early game that I don't know if I could justify running it. The rare version gets even bigger, but it costs 1 more. 16 worth of stats for 9 is a pretty good rate, but I think one of the hardest parts is it has tough X, which is equal to the number of regions between your hero and companion, which means this card actually gets worse the longer the game goes. So I might just run the common because I can play it 1 day earlier when it'll essentially have maybe like 2 more tough and then try and win both expeditions. But yeah, at the end of the game, this essentially would have tough 0 if you're only 1 expedition away from winning. So it's kind of sad, honestly. I feel like this card didn't quite work out for me, where the way the toughness works, it's more of a mid-game card, and you would think it'd be a powerful finisher, but it's actually pretty bad at the end of the game. Salvager is pretty good value for this faction, which didn't have a ton of great draw and resupply. I feel like the stats from hand are great, and then from reserve, getting that resupply can be good, especially with the Bravos Bastion. It's pretty hard for this deck to get multiple boosts out of Bastion in a day, and so yeah, I think that this could have a place in Kojo or Basira. It can also help you dig for your powerful uniques and things, but it's kind of just alright, and you'll really have to decide if it's worth it. Foundry Armorer is mostly just stats. From hand it's fine, and from reserve you get the option to play two 2/2s in the same side or different sides, so the flexibility might be a little nice for Kojo, but it's pretty underwhelming overall. Three Little Pigs again is just coming in at that 4/4/4 for 3. You do have to have a landmark, and the only reason I feel like you'd ever play this over Haven Warrior is because you can get an additional boost from Basira, but I don't see this having a ton of play at this point. Ouroboros Trickster is honestly pretty impressive to me. Maybe it's just because of the name association, but for Basira, I actually like this a lot. I'm running it right now. I can't say it's a must run, so I'm just giving it a 2, but I do like it a lot because you can play this on day 1 as kind of like a 4th, 5th, and 6th Chiron in your deck. I like Chiron a lot more than physical training because it has a body and it costs 2 from the reserve. And so this can be another way to be able to boost up some of your 1-drops like Tiny Jin or maybe even the Bravos Blade Dancer on day 1 and just get that Basira boost. And with some uniques too that benefit from boosting your characters, I feel like this can be pretty good, but the stats are just fine, so anywhere else where you're not benefiting from that boost energy, I don't think it's good enough. For Lyra Navigator, if this had a 2 from reserve, it could maybe see play, but it's just not quite good enough for the cost at this rate. Tanuki's a pretty good sabotage card. It is unfortunate though it's taking a rare slot in Bravos and not really giving you any more than the value of the common. In Kojo, I feel like you can run the most sabotage and disruption and get away with that because you already have like the free Buddhas and a little less synergy, so I think that this could be fine there if you want to have a ton of sabotage in your deck, but I don't think it'll find space in the other heroes. The Hatter is one of the only access to Anchor that Bravos has. I feel like you could possibly run this in, you could possibly run this in Basira as well, but you could definitely maybe see people running this in Kojo, and instead of playing Mighty Jin, you would just drop something like this that has slightly better stats, and then on the next day you could anchor a Haven Warrior or something. I feel like that oftentimes Mighty Jin's just going to be better, and since they have pretty similar stats and costs, you'll probably play the Mighty Jin instead and not have room for an additional 4-drop, but maybe somebody who knows that all of their opponents are playing Mighty Jin might swap this in so that they can trade more favorably or something. I don't know, it could maybe see some play, but it's a little underwhelming right now. Asmodeus is another card that can get anchored. I actually like this a lot for Atsadi. I feel like if you play Shenlong, you're probably trading with your opponent and not really getting any additional advantage, but if you play Asmodeus, you'll probably trade with your opponent still. If you just go on the opposite side from them, it'll be hard for them to beat this out. And then if you do hit the anchored, you can have some residual value for the next day. So I actually think this is a pretty good 6-drop for him, but it's not doing a ton for you in the other heroes. Kitsune is an option for draw. It sucks that you give your opponent a card too, but in an aggressive Kojo, you might be fine with that just to get more bodies and not run out of gas as early. I don't think the other heroes really have room for this. They can probably find something better. Tricaina's interesting. This card's great in Muna, but without an easy way to give this a boost, like with Tasia's hero effect, you have to work a little harder for it, and you don't have as many synergies with this card. It could definitely see play in Basira because of your easy access to boost, but I don't know if it'll have as much of a spot in the other heroes. I feel like it's just a little too low tempo for Kojo and kind of off your game plan for Atsadi. Pravati, once again, we're seeing an anchor effect on a rare. The cost of 4 is just a little high. I've really tried this in Basira, and I can see the potential there. You could definitely anchor something that you played from the reserve with Season, which is huge, and it could work out amazingly. But a lot of the times I was just drawing this early on when I had to put it in the mana, or I didn't have like a way to use it yet. And so I feel like it is great when it's great, but oftentimes it's not going to be doing anything for you. So the most I can really give it is a 2 for Basira, and maybe you could try this in Kojo, but I don't know, it's just not quite doing enough for me with the current set. Acha's another ramp option for Atsadi. You can get more of a benefit out of the extra mana than they will probably, and you're not going to get behind on the board when you play it because of the good stats. So you could definitely have it in those decks, but I don't feel like the other heroes really want this. Son of Yggdrasil is a 6-drop option to draw, but without any toughness and I don't know, just okay stats and things, I don't think this is better than some of the other 6-drops we've seen, and especially for Kojo and Basira that don't really have any synergy with it, yeah, I'm not a huge fan. Ozma is another card that I thought was going to be amazing, but in practice it was a little bit hard to set up. 2 or more other boosted characters means that you need to have a decent amount of mana because you don't have a way to really get free characters at the start of your turn. It's pretty hard to do like all those cards we were looking at. It's pretty hard to get anchored cards, and it's pretty hard to get like free tokens and things. And so by the time you can play this, you have to have a lot of mana, and you have to have 2 cards that can boost, or just the right one in Basira. But I don't know, it didn't line up for me as much as I'd want in Basira, and so I can only really give this a 2. It's almost doing what you want, but it's just a little too hard to use. War Spy is another great sabotage option. From the reserve, it's a powerhouse, but it does take up a rare slot, so I can see Kojo players who are looking for like 6 or 9 sabotage to slot this in. I can maybe see people playing this in a Foundry deck, but for the other heroes, I think you'll probably just go with like a common bouncer or something. The Council's not very easy to get value out of for any of these heroes. You can't really anchor it or sleep it easily, and the stats are just okay. They're just like Kappa level, so yeah, I don't think this is a card for this set. Lady of the Lake can remove fleeting, but you have a lot of easier ways to do that with things like Helping Hand, and the stats on this are pretty underwhelming, so yeah, I don't think this will see a lot of play, but the art's great. Tooth Fairy, 1 more sabotage option. I think this puts us at the potential to have like 12 sabotage cards in our deck if we ran all of them. If the reserve cost was 1, like on the rare for Izmir, maybe this would see play, but it's just not quite good enough. I feel like a lot of the other options give you a better rate for the stats, so I probably won't play this anywhere. Dorothy Gale is pretty cool, honestly, bringing in that removal option that you don't have a ton of in Bravos. I think this can actually be pretty great in Kojo to be able to get rid of something annoying while still pushing the board, and in Itsadi you can draw off of this. In Basira there's not really a spot, but I could definitely see that having play in the other 2 heroes. Sakurabru, the ability to move someone backwards is great, honestly, for Itsadi, because you're going to get behind early while you're setting up, and so then you can kind of slow down the late game and take it back in your favor. Sadly though, the stats are just not quite good enough to guarantee that you can win one side when you play this. So if you ramp enough and you're going second, like, this could probably work, but you might want to look for unique cards that have better stats for this if you're using it in Itsadi, and some of those it'll be a lot easier to guarantee you win one side while moving your opponent back. And yeah, for the other heroes, you're probably losing 2-0 if you play this, so yeah, I don't think it'll see a lot of play. I love this spell, giving a average stats of 1/1/1 for 1, but also removing fleeting seems really strong. In Basira, this works perfectly with everything you're doing, and then the other heroes, I feel like you could definitely play this as well to take fleeting off of things like Tracer. It probably has the least synergy with Itsadi because you're gonna have a hard time fitting good targets for this in your deck and all the other stuff you're running, but it could even just be a way to boost a Tiny Jin or one of your gigantic characters, so I don't know, it can maybe even see some play there. For the rare, you don't get the effect twice now since it has fleeting, but you get 1 extra boost. I honestly don't even know if that's better. It will be good for 1 turn, but a lot of times you want to use your card twice, so the common might just be better. So I don't know. It could be a cool surprise, but I don't think it'll see a lot of play. Intimidation is a pretty strong removal, honestly. Giving the card back to your opponent sucks, but being able to remove something more expensive than what it costs can let you get expedition leads and do a lot of annoying stuff to your opponent. And if you return something like a 4-cost permanent, at that point they'll probably never play it again just because there won't be another opportunity. I think this is great in Kojo to be able to trade favorably early on, and you could honestly see this in any of the heroes to mess up your opponents and get some favorable trades, like playing this on day 1 to remove maybe like a sleeping bureaucrat in Waru or an anchored character from Muna, and then play your 1-drop and get an advancement against your opponent. Like, that could be so strong. The rare can hit cards that cost up to 5 now. If there are a lot of important 5-cost cards in the meta, that would be important. I don't know if there will be though necessarily. and so I think like maybe Monolith in Sigismar is like the main one. If that's a big deck, then you'll want to run this, but otherwise, yeah, I just don't know if this will be necessary. Here's a good ramp option, mana channeling. I feel like in this game, it's a little bit less valuable to ramp than some other similar trading card games, because in this game, like an advancement early on is just as valuable as one in the late game, whereas in other games, maybe you can take out all your opponent's health on the last turn, and so you can just spend time setting up easier. So it's a little more costly to set this up, so I don't think you'll run it in Kojo or Basira, but it's perfect for Asadi. It can help you get those big characters out and get some 2-0s a lot earlier on. The only thing really holding back the rare for Asadi is I feel like if you could run this as a common and a rare, you'd run all 6, but when you play this as the rare, you're getting rid of one of your best ramp spells for it. So yeah, honestly, I feel like you pretty much have to run the common, and there could be decks that try to run both, but then at that point, you don't really have any more ramp options for day one. So yeah, it's just kind of like in contest with itself, and yeah, it doesn't lose fleeting, which is crazy. You can get 4 ramps out of this, but I haven't found a way to be able to guarantee that I'm 2-0ing my opponent in the late game if I play this twice yet, so I'm still kind of waiting for the perfect deck to come together. Physical training is a great rate. Spells are often slightly worse than characters because you do need something in play to be able to get the value out of this already, and then you also are more weak to removal if you're doubling up your stats on the same character. But for Basira, where you want boosts, this is probably necessary in either the common and the rare, at least at a couple copies, and the Ray is good enough that you could see it in either of the other heroes as well. Now with the rare, it costs 1 more from hand, but you get draw. It's honestly an amazing draw card. I feel like you'll see people splashing this in all of the heroes just to keep your hand size full, even in Atsadi, where it doesn't initially have like a lot of synergy. If you have 2 or 3 more mana than your opponent, you can just play this to get two draws and like equal stats for the cost. It's really good, I feel like, everywhere. It's being held back slightly just by the fact that you've got a lot of competition for your rare slots, and you also are pretty weak to removal when you buff one card. The cost is also a little tricky where it really does mess things up sometimes, having to be a 3 cost instead of a 2 cost. So I can't say this is necessary everywhere, but I'm definitely considering it and trying it everywhere. Mana Eruption, though, is probably the best generic removal spell that the faction has right now. I'm giving it a 3 everywhere because I feel like you'll most likely be running at least one of these in every hero. It can hit any character and any permanent. You do lose a mana orb, but you can probably handle that in Atsadi and Kojo, and even in Basira. You're probably fine to get like a 2-0 because you remove something huge with this. So even though you lose a mana orb, yeah, I feel like it's just so good right now that you probably have to run it. And the rare version, it costs 1 less, which is alright, but I think that the common's usually going to be good enough because it's not good in every matchup. Something like Kojo, though, might really like this, and maybe it's Sadi, where you can get a lot of mana orbs to discard, could be happy to play this as well. Twinkle Twinkle's almost a beauty sleep. If you play it from your hand on something, you can discard it immediately from the reserve to make the next card cost 1 less, and so essentially this could be a 1 cost sleep, but you do have to use it earlier in your turn to be able to do that, which makes it a little bit worse than beauty sleep since you can't play it as a 1 cost removal at the very end of your day. Something like Kojo with a lot of wiggle room could possibly try this and fit this in. I don't know though if it'll see play in the other heroes. All In was fun to play with Atlas, but I think that you probably just want to run Physical Training, which is such a strong boost 3 cost card when you get the draw with it. I feel like, yeah, probably common or rare Physical Training just edges this out a little bit, so I don't see this having a ton of play. Mind Apotheosis. This card seems amazing. You're like, I'm going to play this and I'm going to get Kybera off the top, and then I'm going to get Parvati and anchor the Kybera, and like stuff like that can happen. But when I was trying to deck build this for Atsadi, it was basically impossible to run enough good targets for this that you can consistently get an even return. Like in order, yeah, you have to run so many expensive and powerful cards to guarantee that you'll get two good things with this that you can't really run early game, and it's pretty much impossible to build a deck that can consistently use this at that point. So it really seems more like a fun card than a competitive one to me. I think we had a lot of good removal options we've seen already, and giving your opponent a mana is usually, I feel like, worse than taking one of your own. Maybe Kojo will run this and the other removals, but I don't see this having a lot of play. The Bravos Bastion is a very strong card overall. It feels a little bit better in Axiom because it's a lot easier for them to get a lot of cards in the reserve to use this multiple times in a day. Especially with things like Tracer, you really have to build your deck correctly to be able to even get value out of this. I think that people can definitely run this in Kojo and Basira, and it is a strong card. In its Saudi, it's probably not super necessary though. When you upgrade it to the rare, getting that resupply is good. If you're building your deck around Bastion, you're probably gonna just run the rare since you know you'll be playing it anyway. I think this is probably a must run right now in Basira just because you don't have, it's like one of your better boosting win conditions, and if you can get a couple of these out, then you can have a lot of advantage over your opponent to get some free wins. For Kojo, it can be pretty hard to get full value out of this, so you might just stick with the common, and you really have to build your deck right, like I was saying, to be able to really abuse this. So I think some decks might just steer away from this card. It is strong enough though that I'm sure Atsadi players will try it, and if they run an Atsadi deck with only like a couple big drops and that just kind of take advantage of the extra draw to actually play a lot of like little cards in a turn, this could be pretty good. So this card, it is definitely a powerhouse, but without a lot of great ways to resupply and get multiple cards in the reserve in a day, it's definitely not quite as strong as it is in Axiom, but it's still a good card, and I think it'll see a lot of play. Keelan Cylinder, it's very disappointing that this isn't the rare version from Axiom. Then it would be super good in Basira, but even still, it can be really good there to boost up some of your seasoned characters, and it can be really good even in Isadi to boost your gigantic characters. So I think people will definitely be trying this out. It's probably the worst in Kojo, but even it could see more play in Kojo if we had enough draw, but I think that without enough draw, you can't really afford to play something like this in Kojo right now. The Foundry Axiom Bastion might deserve a 1 everywhere, but this is probably my favorite fun card from the set, and so yeah, I'm maybe a little biased. I think it's a lot of fun to play this in Kojo and Basira, but in order for this to be even like slightly viable, you have to build your whole deck around it. At which point, when you don't draw this card, now you have like this awful deck that is way below average, and you're just like praying you eventually get the Bastion. So if we get some redundancy, like another card that can activate effects like this, maybe this could see more play in like competitive in the future because you aren't so reliant around drawing one of like 3 cards in your deck. But I don't know, it's definitely fun to try out, and when you play this with something like Ratatoskr or Haven Trainee, you'll be like super excited that it finally worked. But I don't know, yeah, not a super competitive card, but definitely a fun card, and Basira can take advantage. Most of your reserve abilities are boosts, so it works there, and Kojo, getting that Buddha token can help you set this up a little easier without getting too owed. So I don't know. The Spindle, tough is an interesting thing right now. A lot of decks only run a couple of removals, so you're usually only really losing out to removal like once or twice during a game, at which point the advantage your opponent will get the turn they play the removal is probably pretty similar to the advantage they got on the turn that you played this and did a low tempo turn. So I don't know if it's always good, but it could definitely be good if there's a lot of Izmir or removal in the meta. And if you're going all in on Atsadi and you play this huge 9-cost character, you might be happy to have something like this to guarantee they can't just remove it. So I don't know, in a ramp Kojo, in Atsadi, this could see play. It's fine, but I don't know if it's a must run. Some players might just take the risk that they have the removal and just try and play through it anyway. In Basira, it would be nice to have this and to protect your seasoned characters, but I just don't think you have time to set it up and all the other things you need to be doing. So yeah, that was the full set review for Bravos. I want to thank some of my teammates, Skycrier, Lau, Dash, Izuhark. They gave me some feedback on the ratings that I drafted up. It's been a lot of fun doing these reviews. I'll try and get the Ortis one out next week or sometime soon. Let me know though in the comments, what other type of content do you want to see on the channel? I'm thinking about a lot of things right now, like deck profiles or hero guides, kind of talking about some of the best ways to play them. But yeah, give me your suggestions. Let me know what you want to see. And if you're still looking to get product, you can look in my description. I have a link to Gamers Guild. They're still selling both Kickstarter and retail booster packs. So yeah, go on there, buy a display. It'll give a little bit of a kickback to the channel, which always helps. And the retail displays are actually at a pretty good price. It's $109, I believe, with free shipping for the US. So if you don't have them locally, you can definitely get them there. But it's always good to buy locally too, though, just to support your local game stores. And if they see people making purchases there, it'll make them more likely to host events and things for you. So if it's a pretty similar price, definitely just go locally, but it is an option. And yeah, if you want to buy through my link, it helps as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'm super excited to be able to grind games on Board Game Arena now. If you ever run into me as an opponent, make sure to send a message or something and let me know that we faced each other. I look forward to seeing a lot of you in the Tumult. Make sure to like and subscribe and hope to see you back here soon.